The courtroom silence shatters. The room was so quiet you could almost hear the weight of history pressing down on everyone's chest. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it swallows it. And then, from the defendant's table, came a voice that no one expected. "I'm sorry, but it wasn't just me." But before we continue, please subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell for more updates. Tyler Robinson's words landed like a thunderclap in that Utah courtroom. The 22-year-old, accused of killing conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk in broad daylight, had been a figure of stone throughout most of the proceedings. Cold, unflinching, refusing to cooperate with investigators, stonewalling reporters, staring blankly ahead as the prosecution laid out its devastating evidence. DNA on the rifle, fingerprints on the towel, skin cells on the screwdriver found on the rooftop. But then, in a moment that no one saw coming, he broke. And when he did, his apology wasn't just an apology. It was a breadcrumb, a dark hint, a suggestion that the story wasn't nearly as simple as prosecutors wanted the jury, or the nation, to believe. A nation already shaken. By the time Tyler Robinson spoke those words, the nation was already reeling. Charlie Kirk wasn't just any victim. He was a polarizing, high-profile activist, co-founder of Turning Point USA, a man who had built his career by throwing gasoline on the fires of America's culture wars. People either adored him or despised him, but no one ignored him. And when he was gunned down on the steps of Utah Valley University, mid-event with cameras rolling and students screaming, it felt like the very fabric of political discourse had torn. Was it just another senseless act of violence? Or something bigger? Something coordinated? That's the question hanging in the air when Robinson muttered, "It wasn't just me." The power of a single sentence. Think about it. Those 4 words could mean everything. Or nothing. It wasn't just me. Does that mean there were accomplices? A hidden hand behind the trigger? A wider plot to silence Charlie Kirk and send a message to the political right? Or was it the desperate rambling of a young man who knew the evidence against him was damning, who wanted to muddy the waters just enough to create doubt? In that instant, the courtroom transformed from a simple stage for justice into a theater of intrigue. Prosecutors froze. The defense shifted nervously. And the gallery, packed with reporters, grieving supporters, and political figures hungry for a headline, leaned in as though Robinson might reveal the names of powerful conspirators. The first ripple of suspicion. Of course, we've seen this before. Major trials often take strange detours when defendants decide to speak out. But Robinson's claim carried weight because of the FBI's evidence trail. Kash Patel himself, former intelligence official turned FBI director, went on record saying, "The suspect's DNA was recovered from a screwdriver on the rooftop and from a towel that had been wrapped around the firearm." For most observers, that sounded like a clear-cut case. Robinson handled the weapon. Robinson touched the tools. Robinson was there. And yet, for Robinson to say, "It wasn't just me," well, that cracks the door open to another interpretation. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. DNA evidence can prove presence. But it doesn't always prove intent. It doesn't always prove who pulled the trigger. And in a high-profile case like this, one with political shockwaves, the possibility of accomplices, even shadowy ones, becomes irresistible fuel for speculation. Why this apology mattered. Robinson's apology wasn't slick, rehearsed, or lawyer-approved. It was halting, almost broken. He didn't shed tears, but there was a tremor in his voice, the kind you get when you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you're not sure if you're about to fall or be pushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It wasn't just me." Those words carried 2 different messages, each heard by different groups. 1. To Charlie Kirk supporters, it sounded like a cowardly attempt to deflect blame, a murderer refusing to own his actions. 2. To skeptics and conspiracy-minded observers, it sounded like confirmation of what they'd suspected all along, that Robinson was just a pawn in a larger, darker game. And that's why this trial became more than a murder case. It became a question of truth versus narrative, the human side of shock. But let's step back for a moment. Strip away the politics. Strip away the cameras, the hashtags, the pundits salivating over ratings. Imagine you're sitting in that courtroom. Imagine you're one of the students who was at Utah Valley University that day. You didn't sign up for politics. You signed up for class. You signed up for a chance to hear a nationally known speaker. Maybe you even disagreed with him, maybe you didn't. But what you didn't expect was gunfire, screams, blood on the pavement. Now imagine hearing Robinson apologize. How would you react? Would you believe him? Hate him? Fear him more? That's the raw, emotional landscape this case has painted. A landscape where the line between justice and paranoia grows thinner by the hour. The cliffhanger that changed everything. And here's the kicker. Robinson didn't elaborate. He didn't name names. He didn't give details. He just dropped the bomb and then clammed up. The courtroom buzzed. Journalists scrambled. Prosecutors demanded silence. The judge banged the gavel. And Robinson? He went back to staring at his hands, as if he hadn't just detonated the most controversial moment of the entire trial. What did he mean? Who was he hinting at? And most importantly, was he telling the truth? The answers to those questions could determine whether this case goes down as one of the most shocking lone wolf assassinations in recent American history, or whether it explodes into something far larger. The exposure of a shadow network no one saw coming. The day everything collapsed at Utah Valley University. It was supposed to be just another event in a long line of campus stops for Charlie Kirk. Utah Valley University, nestled against the backdrop of the Wasatch Mountains, had invited him to speak, part of his tireless circuit of college visits, lectures, and fiery debates that had made him both a darling of the right and a lightning rod for the left. For Kirk, this wasn't new. He thrived on controversy. He thrived on pushback. The louder the critics shouted, the more he leaned into the spotlight. He knew the formula. Throw sharp one-liners, rail against woke culture, rally the base, and walk away with headlines. But this event, this one never made it to the closing remarks. The atmosphere before the storm. If you ask the students who attended that day, they'll tell you there was a buzz in the air long before Kirk took the stage. Protesters had gathered outside. A mix of hand-painted signs, bullhorns, and chants echoing across the quad. Inside, supporters lined up early, eager for front-row seats. The auditorium-turned-outdoor stage was electric with tension. Some came to cheer. Others came to challenge. And then there were those who simply came out of curiosity to see the man who had been trending on social media for months. Charlie Kirk was, after all, no stranger to provocation. Whether it was clashing with students on immigration, sparring with professors over capitalism, or throwing verbal haymakers at the media, he had built his reputation on confrontation. And on that Wednesday, Orem, Utah, became his battlefield. The last words before the gunfire. By multiple eyewitness accounts, Kirk had just pivoted into one of his trademark takedowns. He was fielding a student question, one about free speech, censorship, and whether conservatives were truly silenced on college campuses. He leaned into the microphone. Silenced? Look around you. Who's silenced? I'm here. You're here. We're debating. The only people who want silence are the ones who can't handle the truth. The sentence never finished. Pop, pop, pop. 3 shots cut through the air. The sound was unmistakable, even to those who had never heard gunfire before. A wave of panic crashed across the crowd, screams, chairs toppling, people diving for cover. Kirk stumbled, his face twisted in confusion, then pain. Blood bloomed on his shirt, and before anyone could process what had happened, chaos swallowed the stage. The aftermath in real time. Phones fell. Others kept recording. Security scrambled. Students wept. Sirens wailed in the distance. For some, the memory is frozen in fragments. A woman clutching her child and sprinting for the exit. A young man dropping to his knees, praying out loud. Protest signs abandoned on the ground, trampled into the dirt. Kirk's team members shouting for medics, for help, for anything. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. The 31-year-old activist, speaker, provocateur, the man who had built a movement by commanding attention, was gone. Shot dead in the middle of his element. Enter Tyler Robinson. Within minutes, police reports say, suspicion locked onto one man, Tyler Robinson, age 22. He wasn't a stranger to campus. Students recognized him. He blended in. At first, some thought he was just another protester. But surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, and forensic evidence began to draw a darker picture. A rooftop across from the stage. A rifle hidden inside a dark towel. A screwdriver left behind as if dropped in haste. And DNA, his DNA on all of it. By sundown, Robinson was in custody. The headlines screamed assassin. Social media split into warring factions. One side mourning Kirk, the other digging into Robinson's background, desperate for an explanation. Who was he? Why did he do it? And perhaps most chilling of all, was he acting alone? A shockwave through politics. Make no mistake, this wasn't just a campus tragedy. This was a political earthquake. Charlie Kirk was a name that echoed through conservative politics. He had the ear of powerful donors, the loyalty of grassroots activists, and a platform that reached millions. His death wasn't just the loss of a man. It was the silencing of a voice that had amplified a generation of right-wing students. Conservatives erupted in anger. Liberals treaded carefully, some condemning the violence while others whispered about inevitable consequences of incendiary rhetoric. The media, they feasted, churning out headline after headline, each one hotter than the last. And through it all, one name kept resurfacing. Tyler Robinson. The Robinson puzzle. Neighbors described him as quiet. Friends painted him as troubled. His social media presence was cryptic, half memes, half ramblings, sometimes political, sometimes incoherent. But none of it seemed to explain how a 22-year-old ended up at the center of a national firestorm. Theories exploded online. Was he radicalized? Was he mentally unstable? Was he part of something bigger? The FBI's involvement only deepened the mystery. Director Kash Patel's announcement about the DNA evidence sealed Robinson's fate in the eyes of many, but his silence in custody, refusing to confess, refusing to cooperate, kept the conspiracy mill churning. And then came the trial, and the apology, and those 4 haunting words. It wasn't just me. Cliffhanger. The questions that won't die. Here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because if Tyler Robinson was truly acting alone, then this was a story of a troubled young man making a devastating, catastrophic choice. A story that, as tragic as it is, might end with one man behind bars. But if he wasn't alone, if there were whispers of accomplices, if his apology was more than a desperate plea, then this case isn't just about murder. It's about a network, a hidden hand, a shadowy force that turned a campus stage into a political battlefield. And the haunting question that lingers, unshaken. Who else was there that day, pulling the strings?